Ma'am, step away from the reception desk. Now, I said step away. You don't belong back here. Security. Someone stop her before she causes a scene. The words cracked through the glass and steel lobby like drop plates. People looked up from their phones. The hum of the revolving doors swallowed and spat out the sound, but the tension stayed fixed on the polished floor. Grace Hightower froze, fingers still resting lightly on the visitor's sign-in screen. Her breath made a small cloud on the tempered glass. She had arrived early, blazer pressed, case file tucked neatly inside her leather folio. She had come prepared for a quiet meeting, not this. Manager Victor Lang was already striding toward her, jaw tight, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. His badge bounced against his belt clip as he walked. 2 short clicks, like a warning. Ma'am, this area is for authorized personnel only, Victor said, voice loud enough for the room to hear. Visitors wait by the glass wall. You've ignored that twice. Grace lifted her chin. Sir, I don't need explanations, Victor cut in. I need compliance. Step back. A couple near the seating area exchanged glances. A courier paused mid-stride. The security desk light blinked amber, as if echoing the rising tension. Grace's voice stayed calm. My name is Grace Hightower. I'm here for the 9:30 meeting on the 23rd floor. I followed the emailed instructions. There's no record of you, Victor snapped. And unless you have business in this building, you can't wander into restricted hallways. You should know the rules. Grace swallowed slowly. She felt every pair of eyes on her, some curious, some uncomfortable, some sympathetic but silent. She kept her tone measured. I'm trying to sign in. I'm not wandering anywhere. Victor motioned to security. Escort her to the public waiting area. If she refuses, call building control. A security guard stepped forward. His expression wasn't hostile. If anything, he looked unsure, but Victor's presence overshadowed any hesitation. The guard gestured gently. Ma'am, maybe just step aside for a moment? We can figure this out. Grace held her folio a little closer. She felt the familiar sting, the quiet humiliation she had worked her whole life to rise above. She had arrived early, dressed with intention, prepared every detail. Yet here she stood, publicly treated as if she were in the wrong before a single fact had been checked. Victor crossed his arms. You were told twice. Now it's 3 times. This is a place of business. We maintain professionalism here. A thin tremor of indignation ran through the lobby. A woman in a blue coat whispered. She wasn't doing anything, but she didn't speak louder. Grace exhaled once, slow and steady. She thought of the meeting upstairs, the one she had been invited to months ago, the one whose outcome could change the company's next fiscal year. She had prepared documents, drafts, and compliance notes late into the night. The partners were expecting her. Sir, she said quietly, if you check the meeting schedule, you'll see my name. Victor gave a sharp laugh. I think I know how to read a schedule, Ms. Hightower. And you're not on it. Grace's heartbeat pulsed in her ears, but her posture stayed dignified. Please, look again. Victor turned to the guard. Last warning. Move her. His hand hovered toward Grace's arm. And then, a single voice rose from behind the turnstiles. Firm, clear, unmistakably authoritative. Victor, what exactly do you think you're doing? Every head turned. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped out from the elevator bank, face stern, pace quick. The gold ID clip on his lapel reflected the morning light. A few employees whispered his title under their breath. Grace recognized him. Victor did too, and color drained from his cheeks. The lobby went still, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to land. Enjoying this? Tap subscribe for tomorrow's story. The elevator doors side closed, and the lobby returned, slowly, to its half-muted hum. Conversations folded, footsteps resumed. Victor Lang straightened his tie like a man trying to reseal a torn paper envelope. He did not like loose ends. He liked order, schedules, and the neat geometry of authority. Grace Hightower stepped back into the pool of people gathered near the reception desk. She kept her hands where they could be seen, palms flat on her leather folio. The folio smelled faintly of lemon polish and printer ink. Small, deliberate things, she believed in them because they steadied her. The man who had cut across the lobby, James Carroll, vice president of operations, moved with the economy of someone used to clearing obstacles. He did not speak yet. He simply stood between Victor and Grace, hands folded, watching. Around him, whispers slid like soft rain. A receptionist's fingers hovered over the phone. An intern angled his tablet to pretend he wasn't watching. Grace's mouth formed a single, careful smile. It did not reach her eyes. She was not given to dramatic gestures. Her life had been built on preparation. Memos drafted at 2 a.m., pages annotated with tabs and highlighted deadlines. She had been a junior associate once, learning to answer calls at odd hours and carry cold coffee down long corridors. The past had taught her how to move through microviolence, small slights, overlooked names, without giving the slight the satisfaction of spectacle. But that morning had not been meant to be a display. It had been scheduled. The email inbox on her phone still showed the confirmation: Strategic Compliance Meeting, 9:30 a.m., 23rd floor, materials attached. She had printed copies. She had notes. She wanted nothing more than to get the meeting started, speak to the facts, and leave the kind of quiet impression that comes from competence rather than theatrics. Victor's face had reddened, then gone pale. He was a mid-level manager who measured his worth by how well people followed the rules he enforced. He was 38, sharp-jawed, and proud of his neat office with a framed diploma on the wall. Where he saw compliance, he felt safety. Where he perceived deviation, he felt risk. Now he felt exposed. "What is this about, James?" Victor asked. His voice had an edge. He had performed the role of gatekeeper for 3 years. Security logs, keycard exceptions, visitor badges. These were his territories. James's voice was quiet, but the room listened. "Victor, explain why you're confronting a guest without checking the meeting roster." Victor's jaw worked. She tried to get past reception. He gestured at Grace as if the gesture alone proved a pattern. "We can't have people in back corridors." "Protocol. Protocol matters," James said, "but so does verification. Someone in my team scheduled a session for this floor at 9:30. We don't start making assumptions." Grace kept her eyes fixed on Victor. She had seen this happen before, the rapid deployment of rules to disguise uncertainty. She thought of the words she'd rehearsed on a ride-in, the brief opening line she'd used to introduce the proposed compliance framework, and felt the odd familiar burn of being interrupted before she could speak. A younger woman from facilities, a polite face with a lanyard and a braid, stepped forward. "I can check the registration," she offered. Her voice was small but precise. She tapped on the tablet at the desk and scrolled through the list. The display reflected off the glass, rows of names and times, the kind of logistics that keep busy buildings turning. Grace watched the screen. Names blurred into a pattern until she saw it, a scheduled meeting called Strategic Vendor Review, hosted by Operations. The time matched. A name in the organizer column. It was not Victor's. It was James's. The facility worker looked up. "The meeting is listed. 23rd floor. Starts at 9:30. It shows an external counsel joining as well." The words landed like a stone dropped into water. Ripples moved across the faces in the lobby. Victor's posture shifted. He put his hand on the armrest of the security desk as if to steady himself. "External counsel," he repeated. The term meant little yet threatened authority. His mouth made a line. James nodded. "Yes. Please let Ms. Hightower proceed. If there's a credential issue, security can verify once she's in the meeting." There was the soft scrape of a chair being pushed back. Someone muttered, "Finally." The receptionist exhaled as if relieved to be out of the drama. Grace's voice was quiet when she spoke. "Thank you." She did not say it to James alone. She said it for the look that had passed across Victor's face, the look that carried accusation and a hint of fear that his judgment might be questioned. She swallowed a memory, a time years ago when a similar misreading had cost her a promotion. The sting had not dulled. People forget that humiliation does not simply vanish because the moment passes. It lives in the body. It alters the measure by which one trusts open spaces. James stepped aside. "I'll have someone escort you up," he said. His tone left no room for dispute. Victor watched them move. He bent to the security console, hands hovering above the keys. The click of a key card somewhere in the background, one of those small, repeating sounds that had threaded the morning, felt suddenly significant. It was a sound that meant permission, access, lines drawn. Grace rose and walked past Victor with a steady gait. In the board visitor's log, she paused for a fraction of a second and signed her name in a neat, practiced hand. The cursive looped like a professional signature should, calm, clear, unhurried. No flourish. No chance to be mistaken. As she started toward the elevators, her case tapped softly against her hip. The building's air smelled faintly of coffee and polished metal. In the elevator bank, a woman glanced at Grace and then at Victor, and the woman's eyes carried something like apology. Grace did not turn back. She did not need to. She carried with her the documents they believed she could not possess, her notes, the printed agenda, the marked exhibits. If anyone believed the moment was over when she reached the elevator, they were wrong. The truth lived in the next room, the next exchange, where words on paper meet policy and where the consequences of a moment like this are finally written. The elevator doors closed. The elevator rose with a soft hum, stopping twice before reaching the 23rd floor. Each pause made Grace aware of her pulse, steady and slow, like a metronome she controlled by will. She glanced once at her reflection in the brushed steel panel. Tidy hair, calm eyes, blazer still crisp despite the lobby's tension. She had learned long ago that appearance could steady a room before she said a word. When the doors opened, sunlight washed across a wide hallway with framed landscapes and quiet carpeting. A young assistant, Evan, according to his badge, waited near the conference room. He offered a tentative smile. "Ms. Hightower?" "Right this way, ma'am." "Thank you, Evan." Her voice stayed even, warm without being soft. She knew assistants often carried the weight of the room's mood before anyone else. He opened the conference room door. A long table stretched beneath dimmable lights, water glasses lined in a neat pattern. A digital clock on the far wall read 9:27 a.m., 3 minutes to compose herself, 3 minutes to think. Inside, 2 directors were already seated, Margaret Hale from finance, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, and Daniel Brooks from operations, mid-40s, with a stack of printed reports in front of him. They looked up together. Margaret stood. "Ms. Hightower, welcome. We expected you earlier." "Everything all right downstairs?" Grace felt the urge to say yes, to keep the lobby moment contained, private, insignificant. But silence, she knew, could be misread as acceptance. "There was a misunderstanding at reception," she said, careful with every syllable. "But it's been resolved." Daniel frowned. "I'll check with security later. We can't afford delays." He gestured to the seat at the head of the table, the one reserved for external counsel or lead presenters. "Please join us." Grace took the chair, smoothing the edge of her folio. As she settled, she felt a familiar shift, the moment where a room's energy reorganizes around her presence. She opened her notes. The paper smelled faintly of toner and pen ink, grounding her. Margaret clasped her hands. "James tells us you've been reviewing the vendor compliance issues tied to our third-party contractors. We're hoping today sets the stage for the full audit." Grace nodded. "I've reviewed the materials thoroughly. There are several risk areas we need to address. Some are procedural. Some are cultural. All are solvable." The word cultural drifted gently through the room. Daniel raised an eyebrow, but he did not speak. Grace continued, her tone even. "You invited me here to offer clarity. That's what I'll do." The door opened again. James Carroll entered, carrying a small tablet. He moved with practiced calm, but there was a subtle tension beneath it, evidence of a lobby scene lingering at the edges of his demeanor. "Good morning," James said, taking a seat near Margaret. He offered Grace a brief nod. "Glad you made it up." She returned the nod. "Thank you." The clock ticked to 9:30, a subtle mark of beginnings. James placed his tablet on the table. "Before we start, I want to be transparent. There was an incident downstairs involving one of our managers. I'll address it later with HR. For now, let's stay focused on the audit." Margaret sighed softly. Some departments take front-facing professionalism more seriously than others. Grace said nothing. It was not her role to characterize the incident. It was her role to witness, remember, and continue her work. Daniel leaned forward. "Let's start with your assessment. What's our highest risk point?" Grace opened her folio. "Your documentation trail is incomplete for 2 major vendors. Without a clean audit record, you're exposed to compliance penalties. I drafted a corrective action plan." She slid a printed packet across the table. Margaret took it first. Grace continued. "There's also a personnel oversight I flagged. It relates to how decision-making power is distributed across mid-level roles. Inconsistent processes can lead to misinterpretations and unnecessary conflict. Daniel tapped a pen. Conflict? How so? Grace chose her words with precision. When authority is exercised without full information, or when assumptions override procedure, departments become vulnerable. Not only legally, but culturally, internally. A silence followed. Not tense, reflective. James adjusted his tie. That's why she's here. We need an outside lens. Margaret exhaled. Agreed. Ms. Hightower, walk us through your recommendations one by one. Grace began, flipping to the next page. She spoke steadily, guiding them through each step. New documentation protocols, clearer chains of approval, expanded training for mid-level supervisors. Her voice carried quiet authority. No force, no theatrics, only clarity. As she spoke, the earlier humiliation unwound, thread by thread. The room treated her as she was meant to be treated. An expert, a professional, someone whose presence warranted attention rather than suspicion. But deep beneath her calm, a faint question stirred. Had the incident downstairs been a misunderstanding, or a symptom of the very cultural gaps she was here to diagnose? Daniel broke the moment. If we follow your plan, can we pass the third-party audit this quarter? Yes, Grace answered. If we address one final issue. Margaret leaned in. Which is? Grace placed both hands on the table. Accountability. Not just on paper. In practice. The room went still. It was a line that would matter later, far more than they realized. For a moment, the conference room held its breath around the single word Grace had just spoken, accountability. It lingered in the air like a note suspended on a violin string. James shifted slightly in his chair. Margaret looked down at the printed packet as if the answer might already be written there. Daniel folded his arms, analyzing Grace with a new kind of attentiveness. Grace kept her posture straight. She was used to these moments, the pivot points of meetings where language became a mirror. People saw either clarity or threat in the same sentence. Let me explain, she said gently. You can have flawless documentation. You can have policies written with precision. But if the people implementing them act on assumptions instead of verification, you'll always be vulnerable. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. A small draft from the air vent carried the scent of fresh carpet cleaner. The room felt sealed, focused. Daniel tapped his pen once. What kind of assumptions are you referring to? Grace flipped to a marked page. I'm referring to unchecked authority, moments when someone's personal interpretation overrides established process. That's where conflicts originate. That's where risk becomes real. A faint shadow crossed James's expression, almost a recognition. He cleared his throat. We've seen some of that at the lower levels. Grace nodded. It doesn't always come from malice. Often it's from habit. But habits, when unexamined, become patterns. And patterns, when they go unchallenged, become culture. Her voice was calm, but the weight behind her words landed firmly. Margaret straightened. Ms. Hightower, she said, are you suggesting we have a cultural problem? Grace paused. She was precise with her truths. I'm suggesting you have a moment of opportunity. Silence again, but this time the shift was hopeful, not defensive. James exhaled through his nose. That's a fair way to put it. Grace continued. If someone at the mid-level makes a decision rooted in assumption rather than procedure, the company becomes exposed. Legally, financially, reputationally. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You think we're at risk of reputational damage now? Grace chose her next words with care. Not yet, but moments accumulate. And all it takes is one incident witnessed by the wrong observer. One misstep that spreads in a digital moment. James tapped the table lightly with 2 fingers. We've all seen it happen at other companies. Exactly, Grace said. We can prevent it here. Daniel leaned back. Let's go through the first action item. Before Grace could turn the page, the conference room door cracked open. A young HR coordinator, Melissa, poked in carefully, face nervous. Sorry to interrupt, she said. James, we need you downstairs. The lobby staff, well, something happened with Manager Lang. He's requesting to speak with you immediately. James's eyes narrowed. About this morning? Melissa hesitated. Yes. He filed a concern. Margaret muttered something under her breath. Daniel checked his watch. James looked at the group. Give me a minute. Don't stop without me. He slipped out with Melissa and closed the door behind him. Grace felt the shift instantly, the room tilting in his absence. Margaret leaned toward her with a new softness that had not been there earlier. Was the misunderstanding downstairs serious? She asked quietly. Grace kept her eyes on her notes. It was public. That's all I'll say. Daniel frowned. Public how? Grace lifted her gaze. Loud enough for a room full of strangers to hear. Margaret's lips pressed into a line. He should have checked the schedule. He knew my name wasn't there, Grace replied, because he didn't look. Another pause. This one carried weight. Daniel sighed. We'll review it. But your point about cultural gaps isn't lost on us. Grace nodded once. The room's silence thickened again until at last James returned. His expression gave almost nothing away, but the tightness around his jaw betrayed tension. He resumed his seat. Margaret spoke first. Everything all right? No, James said simply. It isn't. He looked directly at Grace. Victor insists there was a security violation, he said. And he's filed a complaint. Margaret gasped softly. Daniel sat straighter. Grace blinked once. Against me. James nodded. Melissa, still at the door, swallowed hard. He said he was following protocol. He's demanding a formal review. Grace's fingers rested lightly on her folio. She felt, not shock, but a quiet, cold clarity. She had seen this tactic before, the reversal. The attempt to rewrite a moment before evidence could be gathered. Daniel shook his head. This is ridiculous. She didn't violate anything. James looked thoughtful. I'll handle it. But, he paused. He's also insisting he had the authority to intervene because he believed you were misrepresenting yourself. Grace's breath stayed slow, controlled. I told him who I was. Margaret's voice dropped. What exactly is he claiming? James hesitated, choosing his words carefully. He claims, James said, that you attempted to access restricted areas under false credentials. A stunned quiet fell over the table. Daniel rose halfway from his chair. That's not true, and he knows it. Margaret looked at Grace, worry sharpening her features. He's doubling down. Grace closed her folio with deliberate calm. Yes, she said softly. He is. A new kind of tension filled the room, anticipatory, electric. Something was shifting, something inevitable, and everyone could feel it. The conference room felt smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in to listen. Grace kept her hands still on the table, not clenched, not shaking, still. Her stillness made everyone else shift. Daniel sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. He's lying to cover himself. Classic deflection. Margaret sighed sharply. And he's doing it fast. That worries me. James steepled his fingers, elbows resting on the edge of the table. He says he acted because he thought Ms. Hightower was a threat to the building. A long silence followed, one that carried disbelief, frustration, and something else, something like recognition. Grace's gaze held steady. Did he file this with HR or with security? Both, James answered. And he's insisting on an immediate internal review. Daniel scoffed. He's panicking, which means, Margaret added, he knows how bad he looked. Grace inhaled slowly. The cool conference room air moved across her skin. I want to understand something clearly, she said. He claims I attempted to access restricted areas. What proof did he offer? James paused. None. Margaret's eyebrows shot upward. None. He's saying his testimony should be enough, James said quietly. He believes he acted within his managerial rights. Daniel muttered, he's digging his own grave. But Grace knew better than to rely on hope. She had seen quick narratives harden into official accounts before, seen how assumptions could calcify into policy-based concerns. She spoke carefully. James, has anyone reviewed the lobby camera footage? His silence was answer enough. Daniel pushed back from the table. We'll pull the footage. That settles it. Grace lifted a hand slightly. Not yet. He blinked. Why not? Her voice softened, but her words strengthened. If he's doubled down, he's already crafting a story. If we move too quickly, he'll claim retaliation. I want the truth documented, not rushed. Margaret exchanged a look with James. It wasn't defiance. It was respect. Ms. Hightower, Margaret said, "You're remarkably composed." Grace offered a small, wry smile. "I've learned that staying calm is often the only way to navigate someone else's fear." The room absorbed that. Then the conference room phone buzzed. Everyone jolted. James answered. "Carol." A muffled voice spoke on the other end. James's expression grew tight. Yes, I understand. I'll be down shortly." He hung up. Margaret leaned in. HR. No, James's voice lowered. Security. Daniel frowned. What now? James exhaled slowly. Victor has requested a formal interview immediately, and he wants Ms. Hightower present. The room fell into stunned silence. Grace didn't flinch. On what grounds? He claims you displayed uncooperative behavior during a security inquiry. Margaret's voice rose. That's the opposite of what happened. James stood. I'll go down there first. You stay here. All of you. Let me assess the situation. Grace didn't move. No. He looked at her. No. I'm not hiding in a room while he builds a false narrative, Grace said, voice soft but steady. If he wants to speak, I'll face him. Margaret swallowed. Grace, is that wise? Grace gave a single nod. Truth doesn't need shelter. James hesitated, then nodded. All right, we'll go together. They gathered their materials. As Grace rose, the edge of her leather folio tapped lightly against the table, an anchoring sound. She held it close, not as a shield, but as a reminder. She had come here prepared. She had come here with purpose. The walk down the hallway felt long. Office doors whispered shut behind them. A few employees watched curiously, sensing tension but not daring to ask. When the elevator arrived, they stepped in. James pressed the button for the lobby. The descent was quiet. Halfway down, James spoke. Grace, before we get down there, I want you to know something. She looked at him. I was supposed to introduce you today, he said quietly. Not as a consultant. As the company's new external legal partner. Grace blinked, but only once. She hadn't expected him to say it aloud now, in this tight metal box descending toward confrontation. James continued. HR hasn't finalized the public announcement yet. Only the executive team knows. Victor doesn't. Grace absorbed the truth. Explain the assumption. The resistance. The quick accusation. And somewhere deep inside, a calm certainty aligned itself like a compass. Thank you for telling me, she said. The elevator dinged. Lobby floor. The doors opened. The scene was already forming. Security standing by the desk, a few employees watching, and Victor Lang at the center, arms crossed, confidence brittle, ready to press his version of the truth. James stepped out first. Grace followed, her posture poised, her folio resting against her side like the quiet weight of truth. Victor's eyes snapped to her. There she is, he said, pointing. The one who ignored protocol. I want this addressed right now. Grace met his stare without blinking. Good, she said gently. Let's address everything. A subtle shift went through the room, like the inhale before the storm breaks. The confrontation had begun. The lobby seemed brighter than it had an hour earlier, harsher, almost metallic. The recessed lights reflected off the polished floor in sharp white angles. Every surface felt too clean, too exposed. Grace stepped forward with measured calm, her leather folio brushing softly against her hip. Victor Lang straightened as if preparing for a performance. Security guard Allen stood a few steps behind him, looking uneasy. A few employees pretended to check their phones while openly watching. James moved beside Grace, but she lifted a hand, subtle, respectful, signaling she would speak first. Manager Lang, she said, her voice smooth, you requested to address this in front of security? Victor clasped his hands behind his back, a gesture meant to project authority. Yes, I want this cleared. Properly. You disregarded building protocol. You attempted to enter restricted areas. You failed to produce adequate identification. James inhaled sharply. Victor. Grace spoke over him, softly but firmly. Let him finish. Victor's jaw twitched. He liked the control. I take safety seriously. I can't allow someone to bypass procedure simply because they claim to have a meeting. Grace studied him for one quiet, unbroken second. You believe that is what happened? I don't believe, Victor said, lifting his chin. I know. And I won't be blamed for doing my job. For a moment, the room held its silence like a fragile glass. Then Grace opened her folio. She didn't pull out papers. Not a badge. Not credentials. Something far simpler. A small, unmarked white card, heavy cardstock, embossed edges. A card that meant nothing to most employees, but everything to those who recognized it. Victor's eyes flickered with confusion. What is that? James stepped slightly forward, eyes widening as he recognized the item. Grace. Grace held the card between two fingers. This, she said gently, is the internal authorization token issued to legal partners for secure access after onboarding, but before keycard programming is complete. Victor blinked, then blinked again. Legal partners? Security guard Alan shifted, understanding dawning across his face. Grace's voice stayed calm. You said I could not be on the 23rd floor. You said I misrepresented myself. You said you were following protocol. She let the silence stretch just long enough for it to sting. Manager Lang, she continued, you confronted the company's incoming lead counsel. Whispers rippled through the lobby, soft, stunned, unmistakable. Victor's face drained of color. See Counsel? No, that's not. I was told you were a visitor. Your name wasn't on the roster. Grace nodded. Because the announcement hasn't been made yet. Only the executive team was informed. It's standard for high-level legal onboarding. James added quietly, I plan to introduce her after today's audit review. Victor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Grace lowered the card. You said you acted because you believed I posed a risk to the building. Yet you never asked for my identification. You never verified the meeting roster. You didn't check with operations. You didn't ask security to confirm my name. Alan cleared his throat. That's true. She wasn't given the chance. Victor shook his head rapidly. I didn't know. I couldn't have known who she was. Grace's eyes softened, not with pity, but with clarity. You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to follow protocol. Verification first. Intervention second. A painful truth settled between them. That was the seeded twist, the inverted power he never saw coming. James folded his arms. Victor. Ms. Hightower will be overseeing the compliance and conduct review for the next quarter, including managerial assessments. Victor stumbled up a half-step back. What? He whispered. Grace turned slightly, addressing security. Alan, would you mind checking the visitor log? You'll find my name, printed, timestamp verified. Alan nodded and scanned the tablet. She's right. It's here. Victor swallowed hard. Grace met his eyes, voice quiet. This could have been a conversation. Instead, you made it a confrontation. Victor's breath came shallow. I didn't mean. Grace closed her folio. The soft click of the clasp echoed through the lobby like a gavel. Intent, she said, does not erase impact. A soft murmur rolled through the bystanders. Victor looked around helplessly, his authority dissolving faster than he could gather it. Grace stepped forward, calm but unmistakably commanding. Let's go upstairs, James, she said. We should finish the audit. James nodded. Of course. As she turned toward the elevator, Victor reached out. Reflexively, desperation coloring the movement. Ms. Hightower, please, can we speak privately? Grace paused. Just one breath. No, she said gently. Not yet. She stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut, leaving Victor standing small in the wide, bright lobby. And for the first time all morning, he understood exactly how grave his mistake had been. The elevator rose in a smooth glide, its quiet hum filling the space between Grace and James. He stood beside her, hands clasped, his expression caught between apology and awe. Grace kept her gaze forward, watching the digital floor numbers climb. Grace, he began gently, I should have warned you sooner. You told me when it mattered, she replied. That's enough. The elevator chimed and opened onto the 23rd floor. The corridor felt different now, no longer a neutral hallway, but the threshold of a truth gathering momentum. Grace stepped out with the steady, balanced stride of someone reclaiming the narrative. As they approached the conference room, low conversation spilled through the doorway. Margaret and Daniel rose immediately when Grace entered, Concern etched across both faces. How did it go? Margaret asked. Grace set her folio on the table. Manager Lang now understands the scope of his error. The situation is clearer. Daniel frowned. Meaning? James answered, taking a seat. He confronted the company's incoming lead counsel. Publicly. In front of employees. Margaret covered her mouth. Oh no. Daniel let out a long, slow breath. He's in trouble. Grace didn't sit yet. She stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the back of the chair, poised, collected. There's more, she said. He filed a false claim. That requires documentation. A knock sounded on the open door. It was Melissa from HR, eyes wide, tablet in hand. Ms. Hightower. Mr. Carroll. HR needs to see you. Both of you. James stood. Now. Melissa nodded quickly. They've reviewed the camera footage. Margaret straightened in her chair. Daniel looked toward the door, tension rising. Grace felt the weight of the next moment settle onto her shoulders like a familiar cloak. Let's go. They followed Melissa down the hallway to the HR suite. Glass walls, muted colors, a few motivational prints that felt suddenly ironic. Inside, Director Helen Ward sat at the conference table, arms folded over a thick folder. Helen looked up, expression grave. Take a seat. Grace sat. James sat beside her. Helen tapped the folder. We've reviewed the footage from the lobby. 3 angles. Victor was not in the room, but his absence was loud. Helen continued. The video shows Manager Lang approaching you before you crossed any restricted line. It also shows him interrupting your attempt to check in, then escalating without verifying your credentials. James exhaled in relief. Good. That settles it. Helen lifted a hand. There's more. She turned the folder around, sliding a printed frame-by-frame sequence toward them. In the still images, Victor's posture looked unmistakably aggressive, leaning in, pointing, blocking. And in every shot, Grace remained composed, non-confrontational. It also shows, Helen added, multiple bystanders attempting to intervene. Grace nodded. She remembered the woman in the blue coat, the courier pausing mid-step. She'd felt their eyes. But the most significant detail, Helen said, is here. She tapped one still frame. Grace leaned forward. The image showed security guard Allen standing slightly behind Victor. And on the edge of his sleeve, barely visible, a small red light blinked. A body camera. James stiffened. Allen was recording. Helen nodded. Audio and video. He turned it on the moment he sensed tension. Standard procedure. A quiet storm of realization spread through the room. Helen tapped a final page. We transcribed the audio. Every word. She paused. Ms. Hightower, your responses were professional throughout. You identified yourself. You stated your purpose. He ignored each attempt. Grace exhaled once, steady. Helen continued. Manager Lang claimed you were hostile, aggressive, non-compliant. The audio shows the opposite. James leaned back, relief washing across his features. Then the case is clear. Helen shook her head. It's more than clear. It's decisive. HR recommends immediate suspension pending a full review. Grace stayed silent. Her silence carried weight. Helen folded her hands. Before we finalize the report, Ms. Hightower, we need to confirm one detail. You are joining us as external legal counsel for the compliance division. Grace nodded. Correct. My contract was executed last week. Helen exhaled softly, as if that one fact tightened every loose thread. Then you should be aware. This falls under your purview. Grace blinked. My purview? Yes, Helen said. You will oversee the internal review, and you will lead the corrective action plan for all mid-level management structures. James turned toward her, eyes warm with respect. This is your call. For the first time since the morning began, the full truth landed. The person Victor tried to shame now held authority over the system that would judge his actions. Grace sat straighter. She lifted the folio, opening to her notes, her handwriting precise, intentional. Then we proceed, she said. Document everything. Let the facts speak. Helen nodded. We'll support your lead. The door opened again, and Victor Lang stood in the doorway, pale, shaken, unsure why he'd been summoned. He looked at Grace. At the HR director. At the folder on the table. Am I, he stammered, supposed to be here? Grace closed her folio gently. Yes, Victor, she said. Please come in. Her voice was calm, powerful, and final. Victor stepped inside the HR conference room like a man walking into bright light after too long in shadow, blinking, hesitant, already bracing for something he could not fully name. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound was soft, but it sealed the space. Helen Ward, director of HR, folded her hands atop the folder containing the printed stills and the audio transcript. James sat upright beside Grace, jaw set. Grace remained composed, her folio resting neatly in front of her. Please sit, Mr. Lang, Helen said. Victor lowered himself into the chair across from Grace, his posture rigid, his fingers curled around the edges of the armrests as though anchoring himself. Helen cleared her throat. We've reviewed the lobby footage and supporting audio. Before we discuss next steps, I want you to share, in your own words, your account of this morning. Victor nodded too quickly. I was doing my job. I saw someone attempting to walk past the visitor line. The area behind that desk isn't for the public. When she ignored my instructions, Grace quietly corrected, I did not ignore your instructions. He froze at her interruption, then pushed ahead. You didn't identify yourself properly. You didn't provide credentials. You insisted you had a meeting, but your name wasn't listed. James spoke, calm but firm. Victor, the roster you checked was outdated. That's been confirmed. Victor swallowed. Even so, I acted out of caution. Helen opened the folder. Mr. Lang, the footage shows you escalating before verifying any information. And the audio contradicts your written statement. A tremor ran visibly down Victor's jawline. I didn't mean for anything to escalate. Grace's expression remained dignified. Intent and impact are not the same. Victor's eyes flickered to her, then back to the table. He rubbed his palms against his knees. I was trying to keep the building safe. Helen held up a page from the transcript. You accused Ms. Hightower of attempting to access restricted areas. At no point did she do so. Victor's throat tightened visibly. I misunderstood. Grace leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, simply present. You didn't check the schedule. You didn't ask for my ID. You didn't allow me to finish a sentence. Victor's face flushed. It was busy. I make quick decisions. James interjected gently but unmistakably. Quick decision-making is not the issue. The issue is the assumption underlying it. Victor shifted. I didn't assume anything. Helen slid the still images toward him. These are from security's body camera. They contradict that claim. Victor looked down. The frozen frames showed him pointing, blocking, raising his voice. Next to each image, Grace stood calm, hands visible, posture composed. He closed his eyes. Helen continued, her voice steady. Mr. Lang, we are initiating a formal corrective review. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending the investigation. Victor's head jerked up. Suspended? I've given years to this company. Grace spoke softly. And you allowed one moment to define you. Her tone held no cruelty. Only clarity, and that made it land deeper. Victor's voice wavered. Ms. Hightower, I didn't know who you were. Grace nodded once. You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect. Silence circled the room like a slow turning wheel. Victor tried again. I wasn't trying to target you. I thought I was enforcing rules. Grace's voice lowered. Then the rules need to be clearer. That will be part of the corrective plan. James folded his hands. Grace will lead the review. She will work with HR to update protocols. This isn't just about your actions. It's about systemic training gaps. Victor looked from James to Helen, then to Grace, his expression a mixture of confusion, shame, and the beginning of recognition. So that's it, he whispered. I'm just done. Grace shook her head. No, suspension isn't termination. The review will decide next steps. But accountability begins now. Victor blinked twice, the fight leaving his shoulders. Guilt settled in its place. Helen stood. You'll receive written notice today. Please turn in your badge at security. Victor nodded, barely. Understood. He rose slowly. Just before leaving, he turned to Grace. I'm sorry, he said. The apology trembled. but it was real. Grace met his gaze. Growth begins with acknowledgement, Mr. Lang. I hope you take this moment seriously. Victor swallowed hard, nodded once, and stepped out. The door closed behind him. A long breath released across the room. James turned to Grace. You handled that with remarkable grace. Margaret and Daniel would hear about this soon. So would the rest of leadership. But for now, the room was quiet, settled. Helen gathered the documents. Ms. Hightower will proceed with your guidance on the corrective plan. You'll have full access. Grace nodded. Thank you. Let's rebuild the culture, not just the policies. Outside the HR suite, the office buzzed faintly, phones ringing, printers humming, footsteps crossing carpet. Inside, the shift had already begun. The office quieted after Victor left HR, leaving a stillness that felt almost like a held breath finally let go. Grace remained seated for a moment, hands resting on her folio, not gripping it, simply feeling its weight. It felt heavier now, not because of paper, but because of responsibility. James stayed beside her. Helen closed the folder and placed it gently on the table as if finalizing a chapter neither of them had planned to open today. Take a moment if you need it, Helen offered. Her voice carried respect, not sympathy, not pity. Respect. Grace inhaled slowly. I'm all right. But the truth was more layered. She wasn't shaken, she was thoughtful. Beneath the calm exterior, she was charting an old, familiar map, where wounds were left, where repairs were needed, and where change could take root if handled with care instead of anger. She rose. I'd like to return upstairs, she said. We still have work to do. James stood. Are you sure? Grace nodded. The audit matters. The culture matters. And the longer we allow this morning to define the day, the harder it becomes to reclaim the tone. Helen smiled faintly. That's leadership. Grace didn't respond. She didn't need to. They stepped out of HR and back into the hallway. Office chatter resumed around them, printers humming, keyboards tapping, footsteps passing. Most employees didn't know what had just transpired. Some suspected. Some had witnessed fragments. But the full truth, only a handful. As they walked, the elevator opened, and Melissa hurried out. Ms. Hightower. Mr. Carroll. I was coming to find you. Grace turned. What is it? Margaret and Daniel asked if you'd return to finish the session. They were concerned about the delay. And Melissa hesitated. They asked how you were. Grace softened. Tell them I appreciate their concern. And that we're on our way. Melissa nodded and disappeared toward the east wing. James pressed the elevator button. When the doors closed behind them, he glanced at Grace with a mixture of admiration and something like, You handled that better than most attorneys I've worked with. Grace gave him a gentle, almost amused look. I've had practice. He tilted his head. With compliance reviews. With being underestimated. She smiled lightly, not bitterly, but knowingly. It's a lifelong apprenticeship. He nodded, understanding more than he said. The elevator rose. When they stepped onto the 23rd floor and re-entered the conference room, Margaret and Daniel stood automatically, as though acknowledging a senior official arriving, not merely a consultant returning. Grace resumed her seat at the head of the table. Margaret spoke first. Grace, we heard HR pulled the footage. Daniel added, Is everything all right? Grace answered calmly. The situation is being addressed through proper channels. James added, Grace will lead the corrective plan. Margaret's eyes widened. Lead it. Daniel nodded slowly, impressed. Well, that's good news. For the company, Grace opened her folio. Let's finish the audit. Then I'll outline the structure for the cultural review. They all settled, the room now carrying a sense of unity, a quiet recognition that leadership had shifted. Grace began again. Her voice flowed clearly, but her tone had deepened. More assured, more anchored. Let's begin with the vendor compliance matrix, she said. Section by section. No shortcuts. For the next hour, she walked them through every page, every concern, every documentation gap. She explained the rationale behind each recommendation, weaving legal clarity with practical implementation. Margaret took meticulous notes. Daniel asked questions, thoughtful ones. James added context from operations. This time, when Grace spoke, no one doubted her. This time, her presence reshaped the room. And though the morning's confrontation lingered like a distant echo, it no longer defined her day. Instead, it reinforced her purpose. After the audit concluded, James dismissed the group for lunch and invited Grace to walk with him to the Terrace Lounge, a quiet area with tall windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The winter sunlight cast long, soft beams across the room. From here, the city looked peaceful, far removed from lobby confrontations and procedural failures. James leaned against the railing lightly. "Grace, I want to say something clearly." She looked at him, waiting. "You handled Victor better than I ever could have. And you didn't just defend yourself, you protected the integrity of the company in the process." Grace's smile was faint. "That's the role." "No," he said. "That's character." She folded her arms gently. "He'll have to face the consequences, but I don't intend to humiliate him." "I know. He hurt me," she admitted. "It was public, unnecessary, and it came from a place I've spent years navigating." James softened. "I understand." But, she continued, "if we treat him as an enemy, we reinforce the very culture we're trying to fix. Accountability and dignity must coexist." James watched her with quiet respect. "You're going to change this place." Grace shook her head. "We're going to change it. Culture is collective." He smiled. "Then let's begin." That afternoon, Grace drafted the framework for the Corrective Leadership Initiative. A new verification procedures, a managerial training on assumption-free protocol, a cultural awareness refreshers, a clear escalation pathways, anonymous reporting improvements. She wrote with precision and purpose, her pen strokes crisp, her notes organized into modules, her thoughts distilled from years of witnessing systems that failed because no one dared name the root. She named it. Politely, precisely, effectively. As evening approached, employees trickled out of the building. The sky dimmed outside the tall windows. Grace gathered her materials, preparing to leave. When she returned to the lobby, footsteps slowed around her. A few employees offered small nods of respect. Someone held the elevator door for her. The receptionist gave her a gentle smile. And near the corner, standing quietly, badge already surrendered, was Victor. He wasn't blocking her path. He wasn't performing. He looked humbled. "Ms. Hightower," he said softly. Grace paused. "Mr. Lang." He swallowed. "I want to apologize again." Properly, she nodded once for him to continue. "I misread the situation. I misread you. I didn't follow procedure. I didn't listen. And I let my assumptions take over. I'm not proud of what I did." Grace studied him, not to judge, but to understand. "Apology accepted," she said. "But what matters is what you learn from this." His eyes moistened, not with tears, but with sincerity. "I'll learn. I promise." She offered him a gentle, human nod. "Take care of yourself, Victor." He bowed his head, grateful. Grace stepped through the revolving doors into the cool Chicago evening. A breeze lifted her hair. The city hummed softly, the sound of possibility rather than tension. She walked toward her car with a steady grace, feeling not the sting of the morning, but the strength of the day. The strength of choosing dignity over retaliation. Of choosing change over resentment. Of choosing to lead. Her folio tapped lightly against her side with each step, a small, steady sound. A reminder. Promise. 3 months later, early spring, Chicago. Morning light drifted through the glass facade of the 23rd floor, soft and golden. The kind of light that made the office feel less like a corporate space and more like a place where change, real change, had taken root. The winter tension that once clung to the building had lifted. People spoke with a different tone. Conversations were slower, more careful, more attentive. Procedures had been updated. Training had been completed. Managers who once clung to authority now leaned more heavily on verification, clarity, and respect. It hadn't been quick. It hadn't been easy. But it had been worth it. Grace stood at the tall windows overlooking the river, a cup of tea warming her hands. She watched the slow movement of early commuters, the city shaking off winter. Her leather folio, still the same one she carried the day of the confrontation, rested on the table behind her, neatly closed. She smiled softly at the thought. That folio had witnessed more transformation than most people realized. Footsteps approached. James Carroll entered the room carrying 2 folders, an expression somewhere between focused and quietly proud. "Morning, Grace," he said. "Good morning," she replied. "How's the new training module draft coming along?" "Finished last night," she said. Module 3 emphasizes situational humility. It's the final piece. He chuckled. "You have a gift for naming things." Grace sipped her tea. "Clarity matters." He set the folders down. "I wanted to update you. The board reviewed the cultural audit results. They're impressed isn't even the word. They said they've never seen an improvement curve this fast." "I'm glad," Grace said. "People worked hard." James nodded. "Because you set the tone." Grace didn't respond immediately. She looked back at the city before answering. "I just helped them see what was already possible." He studied her for a moment. "You know, sometimes a building remembers the day it changed." Grace smiled gently. "Buildings don't change, James. People do." He raised an eyebrow. "And rooms." She looked at him, puzzled. James nodded toward the lobby downstairs. "Have you been down lately?" Grace shook her head. "Not since Monday." "Come on," he said. "You should." They descended together. As the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, Grace felt a subtle tightening in her chest. Not fear, just memory. But the lobby didn't carry the weight it once did. The air felt lighter. The reception desk was calmer. Employees greeted one another with nods that felt genuine. And near the far wall, a new sign hung in a silver frame. "Visitor Verification Protocol, Courtesy plus Clarity for Everyone, Leadership Standard Number 1. Grace paused. James smiled at her reaction. "Your wording." HR insisted. Her lips parted in soft surprise. "They didn't tell me they were posting it. They wanted it to speak for itself." Grace stepped forward, reading it closely. The language was simple, respectful, clear. Procedures anyone could follow. Procedures no one could twist into personal judgment. Standing there, she realized that her work, the long days, the detailed notes, the countless conversations, had woven themselves directly into the structure of the place. Not loudly, not with fanfare, but deeply. As she turned, she noticed someone entering the lobby, a familiar figure moving with hesitant steps. Victor Lang. He looked different, intentional, quieter in posture, more careful in his movements. He wore business casual clothes, carrying no badge. He was here for his check-in session with HR, part of the reinstatement pathway Grace herself had approved. He saw her. He stopped. Then, after a moment, he approached. "Ms. Hightower," he said softly. "Good morning." "Good morning, Victor," she replied. He clasped his hands, nerves evident but steady. "I want you to know I've completed the training modules. All of them. And I've been volunteering for the community outreach days. The HR director said I could come back part-time next week." Grace nodded. "I know. I reviewed your file." He swallowed. "Thank you for giving me a chance to come back." "You didn't have to." Grace considered him. Everyone deserves the opportunity to grow if they're willing to do the work. Victor lowered his gaze briefly, then looked up again. "I didn't understand that before. I do now." She offered him a small, sincere nod. "I'm glad, Victor." Truly. He stepped away to meet HR, but before disappearing down the hallway, he turned once more. "Ms. Hightower?" "Yes. I won't forget this." She smiled gently. "Then let it make you better." He nodded and walked on. James exhaled beside her, soft and reflective. That was something. Grace didn't speak immediately. She stood quiet, allowing the moment to settle. Then she turned back toward the windows, toward the revolving doors where she had once been stopped, toward the place where a humiliation had sparked a transformation. She felt no bitterness, no lingering sting, only clarity. "Come on," she said to James. "We have a lot of work ahead." He grinned. "That we do." Grace retrieved her leather folio, its familiar weight at her side, steady and sure. As she walked toward the elevator, sunlight caught the embossed edge of the folio, giving it a warm, subtle glow. One last, quiet symbol. A reminder of a day that had begun with a crisis and ended in change. Indeed, thanks for watching.